The desert stretched endlessly, its golden dunes shifting under the weight of the scorching sun. For centuries, the Bedouin tribes who roamed these lands saw little value in the black, viscous substance that occasionally seeped through the earth. It stained their clothes, tainted their water sources, and clung stubbornly to their skin. To them, it was nothing more than an inconvenience and impurity buried beneath the sands of an unforgiving land. The true wealth of the desert, as they understood it, lay not in the sticky residue that oozed from the ground, but in the precious wells that yielded water, the herds that sustained them, and the trade routes that connected them to distant markets. Yet, beneath their feet, hidden from their understanding, lay a force that would one day redraw the maps of power and reshape the destiny of nations. Throughout history, merchants and travelers passing through the Arabian Peninsula occasionally spoke of the strange, flammable liquid that surfaced in certain regions. Some even collected it, using it as a primitive adhesive or a means to waterproof their boats. But the true significance of this substance remained obscured until the dawn of the Industrial Age. By the late 19th century, the world had begun to shift, its hunger for energy growing insatiable. Coal had powered the early factories of Europe, but a new era was emerging, one driven by the internal combustion engine and the growing demand for oil. Nations that once relied on coal mines now looked elsewhere, seeking the lifeblood that would propel them into the future. In the early 20th century, whispers of untapped wealth reached the ears of Western explorers and businessmen. Tales of oil seeps in Persia and Arabia piqued the curiosity of geologists, prompting expeditions into the vast, uncharted deserts. British engineers, armed with little more than crude maps, scientific intuition, and a determination to strike fortune, ventured into these lands, battling extreme heat, isolation, and skepticism. They drilled, they searched, and they failed time and time again. Some wells yielded nothing, while others produced only traces of oil, never enough to justify the effort. Many believed the quest to be futile, a costly mistake driven by speculation rather than certainty. But fortune, as history often proves, favors the relentless. At last, in 1908, in the desolate plains of Masjid-i-Suleiman, deep within Persia, the earth surrendered its secret. A well, previously thought barren, suddenly erupted in a furious geyser of crude oil, thick and unrelenting, shooting skyward like an omen of the future. The ground trembled, and within moments, what had once been an inhospitable wasteland became the epicenter of a global transformation. News of the discovery spread rapidly, igniting a frenzy among investors, industrialists, and governments. The world had changed in an instant, though few yet understood the gravity of what had been unleashed. In that moment, beneath the relentless sun of the Persian desert, history turned a new page, one written in oil. The scent of crude oil lingered in the air as drills punctured the earth in search of fortune. Across the vast deserts, the rhythmic clatter of machinery replaced the quiet solitude that had reigned for centuries. British and American oil companies, driven by an insatiable hunger for energy, descended upon the Middle East like prospectors in a gold rush. Their arrival was swift and decisive, their intent clear: to extract, refine, and control the vast reserves hidden beneath the sands. Deals were signed, some in grand palaces, where local rulers marveled at the promises of wealth and modernization, and others in dimly lit offices thousands of miles away, where businessmen and politicians calculated profits and power. The agreements often appeared generous on paper, granting royalties and concessions to local leaders. Yet, these sums were mere fractions of the unimaginable wealth soon to be generated. The black rivers flowing beneath their lands held power greater than any army, but few realized the true extent of what had been surrendered. By the 1930s, the search for oil expanded beyond Persia, and the unrelenting deserts of Arabia became the next great frontier. Geological surveys hinted at a hidden ocean of crude beneath the sun-scorched landscape, and in 1933, Saudi Arabia granted a concession to Standard Oil of California. The American company, eager to unearth the treasure buried below, faced one of the harshest environments imaginable. Workers endured relentless heat, dust storms, and isolation as they drilled well after well, hoping to strike the fortune they believed lay beneath their feet. For years, the results were disappointing. Each attempt yielded little, and skepticism grew among both investors and local rulers. But the desert was not done keeping its secret. Then, on March 3, 1938, the sands of Saudi Arabia revealed their bounty. In Dhahran, beneath the blistering heat, the towering structure of Dammam No. 7 stood as a final gamble. The well had shown promise, but its true potential remained unknown until that fateful day when a torrent of crude erupted from the depths of the earth. The force of the gushing oil sent shockwaves through the industry. Saudi Arabia, long overlooked as an inhospitable wasteland, had just become one of the most valuable pieces of land on the planet. It was a moment that marked the birth of an empire, yet the newfound wealth did not belong to the land's people, at least, not yet. Foreign powers held the reins, dictating the terms of the region's oil industry with little regard for the nations that harbored its treasures. The British controlled Iran's reserves through the Anglo-Persian Oil Company, reaping immense profits while Iranian laborers toiled under harsh conditions. Meanwhile, in Saudi Arabia, American companies secured their foothold with the creation of the Arabian-American Oil Company Aramco. With each passing year, the Middle East solidified its place as the heart of the world's oil supply, yet its leaders remained bound by agreements that favored the West. The foundations of an energy empire had been laid, but the battle for true control had only just begun. The winds of change swept across the Middle East as resentment simmered beneath the surface. Decades of foreign control over the region's vast oil wealth had bred frustration among its people and leaders. They watched as foreign companies reaped enormous profits while their nations received only a fraction of the revenue. The sense of injustice was undeniable. In Tehran, the scent of revolution was thick, carried by the voices of those who demanded sovereignty over their own resources. Among them stood Mohammad Mossadegh, a fiercely nationalistic leader who saw oil as the key to Iran's true independence. In 1951, he made a defiant stand. He nationalized Iran's oil industry, wresting control from British hands and expelling the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. For the first time, an oil-rich Middle Eastern nation had taken back what had long been exploited by foreign powers. The streets of Tehran erupted in celebration, but the move sent shockwaves through the world's power centers. Across the ocean, in London and Washington, Mossadegh's bold decision was seen as a direct challenge to Western interests. To Britain, it was an economic disaster. An empire built on oil was suddenly being shut out of one of its most profitable colonies. To the United States, it was a dangerous precedent, one that could inspire other nations to follow suit. Fear of losing control over Middle Eastern oil alongside Cold War paranoia about Soviet influence led to secret meetings and covert strategies. In 1953, under the guise of restoring order, British and American intelligence launched Operation Ajax, a coup d'etat designed to remove Mossadegh from power. Within days, his government was toppled, and he was placed under house arrest for the remainder of his life. The oil flowed once more under Western control, but the coup served as a stark reminder power was never easily relinquished. The Middle East had spoken, but the West had answered with force. Elsewhere, leaders took note. The struggle for oil sovereignty was no longer confined to Iran. It was a battle echoing across the entire region. In Saudi Arabia, King Faisal watched the unfolding events with careful determination. And like Iran, he chose diplomacy over defiance, negotiating better terms with Aramco to ensure a greater share of profits for his kingdom. Over time, these negotiations would lay the groundwork for Saudi Arabia's eventual control over its own resources. Meanwhile, in Iraq, nationalist sentiments were on the rise. Inspired by Iran's brief victory, Iraqi leaders sought to reclaim control of their oil fields, leading to gradual nationalization efforts that would redefine their economy. In Libya, the tide of change surged with even greater intensity. A determined new leader, who had taken power in 1969, sought to end the Western grip on the nation's oil. With unwavering resolve, he imposed sweeping demands, compelling foreign oil companies to renegotiate contracts on terms favorable to Libya. His success inspired other nations, proving that the Middle East was no longer bound to foreign interests. The region was awakening, and its influence was about to reshape the world. The era of Western dominance over Middle Eastern oil was beginning to collapse, giving rise to a new age of resource nationalism. The world moved to the rhythm of oil, yet few realized how fragile that rhythm had become. For decades, Western nations had relied on a steady flow of cheap Middle Eastern crude to fuel their industries, heat their homes, and power their economies. But in October 1973, that delicate balance was shattered. War erupted between Arab nations and Israel, reigniting long-standing hostilities in the region. As Israeli forces, backed by the United States and its allies, clashed with Arab armies, a new battle unfolded, one fought not on the battlefield, but in the oil markets. In a bold and unprecedented move, the Arab members of OPEC, Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, decided to retaliate. They cut oil production and imposed an embargo on the United States and several Western nations that had supported Israel. It was an economic weapon unlike any seen before. The effects were immediate and devastating. Across the United States and Europe, gas stations fell silent. Long queues of desperate drivers stretched for miles, their vehicles idling, their tanks empty. Rationing measures were imposed, and governments scrambled for solutions. The price of crude oil quadrupled almost overnight, sending shockwaves through global markets. Inflation soared, economies reeled, and industries dependent on cheap oil faced an existential crisis. Western nations, once confident in their ability to control the world's energy supply, suddenly found themselves vulnerable. The embargo was more than a shortage, it was a revelation. It exposed the extent to which the world's economic stability rested in the hands of oil-rich nations, many of whom had long been dismissed as mere suppliers rather than powerful players in global politics. For the Middle East, it was a turning point. The balance of power had shifted dramatically. No longer at the mercy of foreign interests, OPEC nations had demonstrated their ability to dictate terms on the world stage. The wealth generated by skyrocketing oil prices funneled unprecedented riches into the Gulf states. Nations like Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and the United Arab Emirates reaped the benefits of this newfound leverage. Their once sparse economies, long dependent on Western oversight, transformed almost overnight. With oil revenues flooding in, ambitious development projects began to reshape the region. Where barren deserts had once dominated, skyscrapers rose, and modern cities flourished. Dubai, once a small trading outpost, began its rapid ascent toward becoming a global financial hub. Riyadh expanded into a bustling capital of power and wealth. Oil had long been seen as a mere commodity, but now it was the foundation of an empire, one built not just on natural resources, but on the newfound confidence and influence of the Middle Eastern nations that held the world's energy supply in their hands. The sun dipped behind the skyline of Abu Dhabi, its golden glow reflecting off towering glass buildings that had once been nothing more than barren desert. The wealth of oil had reshaped the Middle East, funding grand infrastructure, modernization, and global political influence. Nations that had once struggled for control over their own resources now stood as economic powerhouses, commanding respect and recognition on the world stage. Yet, beneath the gleaming prosperity lay an unspoken truth: oil was not infinite. The black gold that had fueled decades of transformation was a resource with limits, and the world was beginning to look elsewhere. As climate change concerns and technological advancements drove the world toward renewable energy, the rulers of the Gulf sought new paths. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar recognized that their future could not solely depend on oil. They launched ambitious projects to diversify their economies. Saudi Arabia's NEOM, a $500 billion futuristic city powered by clean energy, stood as a symbol of this shift. Dubai, once a modest fishing village, had transformed into a global hub for tourism, finance, and innovation. The once oil-dependent economies were now investing in artificial intelligence, renewable energy, and space exploration, determined to maintain their relevance in a rapidly changing world. Despite these bold moves, the shadow of oil still loomed large. The geopolitical landscape remained intertwined with energy politics, and global demand for oil, though fluctuating, continued to shape alliances and conflicts. The Middle East still held the world's largest reserves, ensuring that even as alternative energy sources emerged, oil remained a powerful economic and political tool. However, the urgency to adapt grew stronger with each passing year. Some nations moved swiftly toward a diversified economy, while others hesitated, reluctant to loosen their grip on the resource that had once made them indispensable. The Middle East, once defined by vast deserts and tribal lands, had risen to power on the back of oil. But the future would not be written in crude alone. The challenge was no longer about controlling the world's energy supply, it was about ensuring that power endured long after the last drop was drawn. Thanks for tuning into the past. Don't forget to subscribe and join me for more stories that shaped our world.